guys, it's Emily and Mary from Koehler and Dram, and we are joined here today with Adam Gladue, who recently was a contestant on HBO's Full Bloom, and we're so excited. He's a super, super talented florist at Arts and Flowers Studio here in Minneapolis. He was our 2017 Floral Designer of the Year and also a featured presenter at our 2018 Spring Wedding Show. So we're familiar with Adam and his work, and we're so excited to have him here to talk about his experience on the show. Adam, welcome. Thank you so much for giving your time to us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Do you want to talk about who you are as a designer and kind of give people an introduction here real quick?
Yeah, for sure. So I have been a floral designer for about 5 years now. And at that time, I've worked with Arts and Flowers, and that's actually kind of why I moved to Minneapolis. So I am a second generation florist. My mom had her own shop for a while, and she's been in the industry for about like 35 or 40 years. So yeah, it's just sort of weird. Like, I never thought that I would end up in flowers. I always wanted to end up in restaurants and the culinary industry. So yeah, it was a total switch for me. And yeah, Full Bloom has sort of been like the icing on the cake for like this crazy little, like, not so expected entry into the world of floristry. Like you said, like in 2017, 2018, I was designing the year at Koehler. And like since that was sort of like the beginning of like my flower journey into Full Bloom, like being active in the world of like competitive floral design and, you know, trying to take those opportunities to like better myself as a designer, like are ultimately like what led me to doing HBO and being a part of Full Bloom.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. You were also inducted into AIFD recently too, like last year, correct?
Yeah, so last year at the symposium in Las Vegas, I was inducted into AIFD. It's pretty much been like a goal of mine, like since I started into the floral industry. I found out about AIFD through my mom, actually. That was always like a goal of hers, to become an accredited member. And so that was something I sort of wanted to do, both for myself, but also to kind of carry that through for her and sort of like her honor. Yeah, so like without her and like her exposure of AIFD to me, I don't know if I ever would have like necessarily found out about it. So yeah, that was one of my big goals, like when I started out in floristry, is to like get that accreditation. So that actually started in 2017 is when I first tested in Seattle. And I got my certified floral designer accreditation. And then the next year I retested in DC and then was really fortunate to pass their examination. So then, yeah, last year I was inducted.
That's an amazing accomplishment. Congratulations.
And for those who don't know, the AIFD, it's a lot. It's brutal. I've heard it's very, very intense. And so it is a huge honor to have those letters. So that is an awesome accomplishment. For those who don't know what Full Bloom is, this is a floral show. It's a kind of thinking about like Great British Bake Off, where floral designers from around the country come together and they are set out to win $100,000 by creating floral designs. So each episode, they have one individual design that they're given, a task, and then after that, throughout the episode, then they team up together and do a group challenge. And then at the end, one person is eliminated. So each time, each episode, it builds. You get in touch with the characters, and you guys, we just all fall in love with each and every person there. So that's just a quick background on what Full Bloom is, because I realize some people might not know what it is yet.
Yeah, it's fairly recent. And so Mary and I watched it, kind of binge watched it over the weekend, and we were like texting back and forth. I got more invested in the show than I expected to. It was super fun to watch, and it was so nice to see a familiar face, because that kind of helped me get more engaged too. So will you tell us a little bit about your kind of general experience on the show and what the whole process was like?
Yes. Oh my God. So it's been such a process, like literally since January 1st of this year. Is like sort of the beginning of like my application process into Full Bloom. And it's really been like this, like literally 12-month process. So the way I got into it was on New Year's Day, I woke up to an Instagram message from a casting director, and it went into my spam. And so I like clicked on it and they were like, hey, just reaching out, we're casting for Full Bloom. And I don't know if you know anything about it, but we're doing this floral design competition for HBO Max. And I was like, okay, like, I wasn't sure if it was legitimate or not. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna reply and like see what, like whatever. So I ended up jumping on the phone that day with, her name is Bree, and she kind of went over basically like the process and sort of like what they were about and like, you know, the parameters of what they were trying to do. And so from that, like, it sort of began this interview process of me making or submitting a ton of photos to the production company. And then they wanted to have me make a design that sort of encompassed basically like who I am as a floral designer, like what inspired me. And so my partner and I ended up doing a floral couture photo shoot. And for those of like you who don't know, I'm also a drag queen on the side. So we ended up doing this whole like floral couture drag photo shoot. And that was the design that I submitted to HBO
Oh, that's
to be like, hey, check this out. And it was like, you know, whatever. They're either love it or they're gonna be like, okay, whatever. But they liked it. And so, yeah, so they ended up filtering through, like, I think there were over 1,000 entries to try and get on the cast. So I was like really grateful, really, yeah, just like incredibly grateful that like I had a casting agent reach out to me because I knew that they had started the casting process actually last fall,
mhm.
but I just didn't have time to do it because we were in the holiday season and like Arts and Flowers is just so busy during the holidays. So yeah, like it's just been like this sort of like total serendipitous like adventure. Yeah, so I ended up like getting the call back to fly out to LA, and there were 20 floral designers that they selected, and we all flew out there and they did an in-person interview. And that was basically like us being in a hotel over like a weekend, and we had to fill out a couple of like a couple interesting forms basically to like make sure that we weren't like a psycho. So there's like a whole like
Wow.
psychology thing, and there's like 500 questions. You're like, you know, you're answering it like, oh my god, am I crazy? So like, so we filled that out, and then there was a technical sort of like design interview. And so what they did was they broke the us down into groups, and then they brought us into a studio and they had cameras on us and they all gave us the same designs or the same materials to work with, and they gave us like 20 minutes or something like that to make a design. So in a lot of ways it was really similar to some of the floral competitions that I had done through Koehler and Dram, through the Minnesota State Florist Association, through the American Institute of Floral Designers. So it was like something that I was comfortable with, but also like completely different because designing on camera is just, it's such a surreal experience. So yeah, we made those designs and then brought it to like the entire production board and like talked about it, and they asked us questions who we were and just trying to like, you know, give them something to go off of because they are trying to build a storyline. So yeah, then it kind of like there was this like nerve-wracking waiting period, just waiting to see if like you get the call back or not. And so it's like shocked and like it's still like surreal to me. But yeah, I got the call back and we ended up filming end of February, beginning of March. So we all flew back out there and we got about two and a half episodes finished. And then we ended up actually shutting down for COVID.
Yeah, I read
Um,
that.
yeah, so like that was really, that was an experience. Um, yeah, like we just like everything just stopped and they're like, okay, like you're all going home and like we think we're gonna pick it back up, but we're not really sure. And so it was sort of like this like 5-month waiting period of just being like in limbo and like crossing your fingers hoping they're gonna pick it back up. And so in July and August they actually picked it back up. But the crazy thing was that because we were on like on episode 3, like 2 designers had already been eliminated, but when they picked it back up, like they started with all new, or they replaced those 2 designers with 2 new designers, and then we just started from the beginning. So yeah, that was that was one of the biggest like surprises and shifts to to full bloom for us was like the eight contestants who had already been there. It was like, okay, like now we're pretending like we're seeing each other for the first time.
Right. Yeah.
And they actually ended up restructuring the whole show in that time. So
Whoa.
yeah, that was just like, that was really interesting because Netflix, the big flower fight.
Yep.
And so they kind of watched that and then kind of recalibrated what they were doing based off of that.
Well, that's so funny. I'm also going to state right now that there probably will be spoilers. So if you have not seen Full Bloom, now is the time to stop. Like, come back later once you've like watched Full Bloom, because we are probably going to like, spoilers are going to come out during this. So if you're like, you know, not trying to see anything, stop now, come back later. So, you know, what's really interesting is I watched the big flower fight and don't hate me, okay, don't come for me, but I was a little disappointed because I felt like it was more plant driven. And I had heard that it was going to be florists, and I didn't feel like there were any florists on there. So I was really happy to see that there were florists, that it was like real floral competition things, like structural things that you guys do in there, that, you know, in real life that you would actually do. So I really, really enjoyed. I'm really glad they restructured it. I don't know what they had to begin with, but I'm very, really happy with how they ended up creating this whole design for you guys, because it was ingenious.
Yeah, and like that was one thing like going into it that I was a little nervous about too, because like it's a totally new thing for like television to take on like floral design, because we've seen cooking, we've seen, you know, fashion design, we've seen baking and all that, but like to do floral design, just trying to figure out like what angle they were going to come from. Like I think we were all like pleasantly like relieved and like really grateful that they ended up taking like the vantage point that they did, because a lot of it really is like things that you do as florists. And it sort of like encompassed like such the wide breadth of like what we do as designers. You know, on the show, we're doing everything from like a budget bouquet where you have like $50, and like what can you do with those $50 to like, you know, $80,000 flower walls. It's like this huge like breadth of things. So yeah, it like, if you've seen the big flower fight on Netflix, and like you had feelings about it, you should definitely check out HBO Max's Full Bloom, because it's a totally different show. And like you said, the big flower fight, like it was a lot more landscaping based, and this is, you know, 10 florists who like have such a wide background in floristry. Like, you know, some of them do studio design, and some of them do like really interesting bespoke applications and like manipulation of flowers, like, and then some of them like myself, like, you know, like we work in full service brick and mortars. So it's like this really interesting mix of designers that like, if you are all in the industry, like you're going to find somebody who you resonate with.
That was one of the things that I kind of appreciated the most about the show, is that it felt like all of you have really solid technical abilities, but you're all like legit floral designers, not, you know, you're not a plant enthusiast or a hobbyist. Like you all have made careers out of floral design, and you're all like very dedicated to that. And it blew me away, like just the sheer amount of flowers, you know, watching every episode and the camera panning the product that you guys had to work with. It not only was it gorgeous, amazingly beautiful, but I'm like, that is so much money right there. That would be so fun to just work with an unlimited budget. But then I also really appreciated the fact that you guys had that $50 challenge, or kind of towards the end there was a bouquet that you had to build that was actually going to be shipped. So having to think about that, because like Adam, you work in a full service shop, you do have to consider, how is this going to ship? What's it going to look like when it gets delivered? What budget do I have to work with here? But I kind of want to know, like from your standpoint, was it just like exhilarating to be able to work with whatever you wanted without concern for budget?
So that was a total double-edged sword. So yes, first and foremost, yes, it is like a mind-blowing experience, just like walking in and being like, okay, you can have anything you want, and you do have anything you could possibly want to get your hands on. But then, like, you know, you have to think of it in terms of like the challenge, like what are they using? What are they looking for? And like realizing that they're giving you everything that you need, so much more. So like that was one of the big challenges too, is like, you know, working with an unlimited amount of like hard goods and, you know, fresh cut flowers and plants, but also like knowing when to like scale it back and really choose and select things that make like, a cohesive story. And that was like really probably like one of the biggest challenges for myself, but also I think like the other 9 designers, like all of us in general, you know, like we don't often get times to work with that kind of backstock. And so like to have that at your disposal, it's almost overwhelming. But yeah, that, I mean, that's part of the challenge.
That's
Well,
super interesting. That was probably the most insane part for me. Like the murals that you guys did during that very first challenge, just insane.
yeah, the scale. And I was sitting there and I was watching it and I was thinking about just like real time, like there were times where I'm like, that's not enough time to do what you guys are asking them to do. So like, how was the time constraint with like, this endless amount of flowers and then everyone's like rushing and whenever it's so funny because when you watch like baking shows, they're pretty relaxed, like, oh, hey, like sample this, like very chill. And then you watch throughout the show and they'd come talk to you and I'm like, judges, leave them alone. Like, I know this is part of the show, but like they're busy. They've got 2 hours, like leave them alone. How did you balance and how was the time and how did you feel about that going into these challenges?
Yeah, so that was like, that was a thing. It felt like we never quite had enough time to get it done. But like, here's the thing, like the way that they structured the large challenges specifically, like they set us up in a way that like, if you planned everything out, like pretty much like on point, that you would be able to get it done, right? But like that was the challenge. Is like they didn't give you like that extra hour that you needed or that you wanted to like finish those challenges. Like you had to know exactly what you were gonna do. So yeah, that was a thing. Also, in terms of like interviewing us, it always seemed to like, for me, I know like for me personally, they always seem to catch me at the point where I was like running the most or like feeling the most out of breath. And they're like, oh, so what do you think? I'm like, I don't know. Like today we were gonna. um, so that was cute. Um, yeah, and then like the other thing though that like I don't know if that like viewers when they watch this or if like you've already seen it, like every day was like 100+ degrees outside, right? So like we're working in like 100 to like 106 degree weather in full California sun with flowers like going up 30-foot walls. So it's like that was like the underlying like challenge element that like, okay, do this huge challenge, now do it in full California sun. And so like that in itself was like really a factor in like how much you can get done in a certain amount of time, because like, you know, you have designers like hustling and then some of them are getting like heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that was a huge part of it.
Well, we don't have that problem usually in Minneapolis. Like it gets hot, but it's not like 106-degree hot
Uh,
here, So I'm sure that was a little bit of a shock to the system too, trying to work in kind of like those conditions because we're just not used to it.
you know, give me a setup in winter and like, let's talk.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like a
So
whole new thing.
yeah. So you created a bunch of pieces on the show, and I really want to know, like, which one was your absolute favorite? Which one would you do again and again if you could? And which one was your least favorite and you never want to do it again in a million years?
Okay, so let's start with my favorite.
Yeah.
I think honestly, like my favorite personal piece was the bicycle challenge.
Yes, I
Um,
love that one.
Yes.
And like, okay, so the reason why it was my favorite is I think it resonated most with me as like a retail florist working in a full service shop. So like when you work in full retail, like your job is to have the client and like sort of find this beautiful middle ground of like what they're looking for. And then also your job is to give them something that they didn't even know that they needed. And so like, I think that beautiful moment is like what really resonated with me when I was making Connor's bike. You know, and at that point in the challenge, like we pretty much knew each other in terms of like style and like what influenced us and what like each of us was really passionate about. And so like I was really like happy that I got Connor's name because I knew that he had like a very distinct style and one that like I really resonate with as well. And so like, to be able to create that moment for him was like, I think that's why it was my favorite. But yeah, on the converse of that, I think the one that I don't know if like I disliked any of the challenges. I think the one that I wish I would have had more time on and more foresight on would have been, I think it was episode 2, the suspended floral design challenge. So they gave us each like a 3 or a 4x4 box, and to create, the challenge was to create sort of like a suspended piece within the box, and for it to look like effortless and airy and like it was just floating in air. And that challenge, like I got a little caught up on. It was again like sort of that tricky mix of trying to like push yourself to do something that's totally unexpected and come with something fresh and new, but then also, you know, you're trying to keep in mind what the judges are looking for. And like, you know, the 3 judges that we have are incredibly talented and they come with such a wide like industry experience. So like, but like you also know that they have a specific style that they resonate with. So it's like trying to find that really, you know, that balance of like pushing something new, but also doing something that is just at the end of the day, beautiful. So that was the challenge for me, is like, I think I got too caught up in some of like the art or structural bits. So like, if I could go back, I think I would have just added more hours.
Well, so one thing that like I kind of was wondering about is, do you know going into that first challenge, like what's happening? I mean, you all seem surprised, but like how much time do you have to kind of like in your head create this idea of like specifically like your suspended box? Like, you know, you come into it and maybe you know about it, but do you like, how much time do you have in order to like, do they give you 30 minutes before, you know, how does that work?
Yeah, so the way that they had our challenges set up was that we found out on the solo challenges the night before. So we would get like a prompt that said, like for the suspended piece, for example, like you're going to make something suspended in a box. But they don't tell you what size the box is. They don't tell you what materials you have. They don't necessarily tell you like all of the judging criteria. So again, it's sort of like this double-edged sword of like you are starting to think of like what you're gonna do, but you have a night to just like spin in your head about it. And then when you arrive on set, like you get more specific parameters. But that was just for the solo challenges. For the team challenges were a totally different thing. So every solo challenge has the top 2 designers, and those 2 go on to the next episode to become the team captains. So the team captains do get prompts for the next team challenge. So they're the only ones who actually know like what's going on the next day. The rest of the team members on those teams have like no idea what's going to happen. So when we arrive on set, like it is actually the first time that we're seeing those challenges. But even the team captains don't necessarily know like everything that's going to happen. Just kind of get like they get the prompt and then they get a tour of like what the set is going to look like for the next day, but that's about it.
Oh, well,
That
yeah,
would be a good challenge.
that
So the team captains that are not allowed to tell you as team members, like what to expect the next day, like there's no pre-planning, you just get thrown into it.
Exactly. So like, yeah, you were like sworn to secrecy as team captain, and which is tough because we're all in the same hotel. Like after every episode, we're just like on the same shuttle van going back to the hotel, and everyone's like, "So what's the challenge tonight?" I'm like, "I can't tell you." um, so yeah, that is sort of like the amount of prep we got going into every challenge. So like when you're seeing it on camera, like it pretty much is like what we had to work with.
That would be intense. So I think the judges would probably agree that you have a very unique style. I think you used the materials available to you in an entirely different manner than the other designers did on the show. And I think maybe arguably like the most, I guess, unconventional or avant-garde style. Do you feel like that was like an advantage or a hindrance, or how do you think that your design style kind of fit into what the competition ended up being?
You know, I think that when I went into it, I knew that I wanted to come up with something that no one else was doing, because I feel like everyone there had like such a distinct design style. So I knew that like I wanted to bring in something that was a little different, that was a little unexpected. And I think in some ways it really did help me stand out from the other 9 designers, because I was like, okay, if like I could just make like a pretty arrangement that I do like at the shop, which is fine. But also I'm like, okay, let's just get weird with it. And so I was like, what if we like on like the first challenge, I was like, what if we just took a trash bag and sprayed it? And like, that was my like unexpected element. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, what a better time to explore being like avant-garde and a little different than when you're on a
Yes.
challenge, competing for $100,000. Like
Right.
that
Go big or
sounds
go home, right?
yeah, totally. And like that exactly was the thing. It's like go big or go home. And sometimes it like really worked in my advantage. And then sometimes like I really had to like try and get the judges on board. Like, no, like this is like where I'm coming from. And I think it definitely challenged myself, but also some of the judges, like really look at things and decide like, okay, like what is floristry? Like what is beautiful in their eyes, or like whomever. And so like that was like where I wanted to come from, is like to push sort of people's conceptions of like what floral design is.
Well, I know that this is never like, it's never easy when someone leaves, and it seemed like you guys throughout the whole show got closer and closer, like as the episodes kept going, and you guys seemed to really be invested in each other. And I know one of the like toughest moments was probably when Kristen got eliminated. How was that when eliminations happened, and like, what was that like for you guys as designers? And then how did you kind of like snap out of that, like, oh no, it's going to be like, it could be me next kind of thought, when you go into that next challenge and like giving yourself a clean slate? How was that for you?
That was challenging. I mean, I think especially towards like the later half in the competition, when they're doing the elimination, like you really don't know what if you're going to be on the chopping block or not, because they're literally splitting hairs between the designers, trying to look for every little thing that like they can go on, because every design at that point, they're so good, like, right? So all of the designers on the show are so incredibly talented. So like when the judges are looking at eliminations, like they're picking like they're literally splitting hairs on some of the things. So like Kristen's last episode, for example, like I thought their card that they did was like beautiful. I mean, it was an explosion of color and it had it spilling out, but then like I think for us, like that was so unexpected that she was going to be the one that went home. And so like going into the next challenge, like it really is like the solo challenges and the team challenges, they really are the next day. So like, it's not like we're always getting like 2 or 3 days in between each challenge to like recoup and just kind of like recenter and refocus. So going into like that next chandelier challenge, like that was still on our mind. And I think like, again, like that is sort of like the big challenge of it. It's like, it is like a nonstop full throttle thing, like from episode 1 until like whenever it is that you go home, like you are locked in that roller coaster and like, let's just go. And so like, I think like you have to have a really strong sense of like who you are as a designer. And like also, but it is challenging. I mean, because you get, especially the longer that we're in the competition together, like we get closer and closer. And the team challenges just become that more intimate because you're working in smaller groups and relying a lot more on one another. So yeah, as it goes on, it gets more and more challenging.
I feel like that would be another one of those double-edged swords that you talk about too, like sort of this sense of relief that it isn't you, but also feeling really sad that, and especially getting further and further into the show, the friendships and the relationships that you form with the other designers too, just feeling really sad that they're leaving. I think that would be really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, especially with Kristen, like she is one of the people that I feel like I connected most with, because in a lot of ways we sort of have like this like out of left field eye for like what we're trying to do. And I got to work on her team a couple of different times, like as a supporting member when she was team captain. So like I really got to work in close proximity with her. And so yeah, that was really tough to watch her go. I think between like her and Connor, those are two of the designers that I think I resonated most with and like connected most with.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a hard episode for sure.
So I have a question too about that, and I don't want to spoil too much, but one of the things I loved that you said, Adam, when you did finally go home, was that you were leaving the show like a changed designer. Like you were not the same designer that you were when you got there. And I thought that was really insightful and really interesting. So can you talk a little bit about how you changed or how the experience changed you, both in terms of maybe just as a person having gone through that and also as a designer?
Yeah, I mean, so I think what's really interesting is I went into the show expecting um, me to just like produce beautiful designs and like that would be my experience of it, and then I would come home and then just like settle right back into things. I don't know why I thought in my mind that would be how it ended up. But everything, you know, like from the design standpoint, for example, like being around that many other designers and working with them like every day, like I was picking up so many interesting like tips and tricks of like how other people work. You know, like at Arts and Flowers, like I'm really fortunate to work with, you know, several other designers every day in like an open design format. So we're constantly feeding off one another. But to be able to do that with designers who have completely different styles and backgrounds, like that inevitably like changes your design style, and how you look at things and how you think about floristry. In terms of design, like that was one of the big things. But then also like, you know, on the show, they really wanted to get to know your personal narrative, and they wanted to know like who you are. They wanted to know, you know, like how far back you could peel some of these layers and really be like vulnerable and just like out there with your narrative. And so I think for me, a lot of it was like the convergence of like myself as a florist and as a working professional, but then also myself as like, you know, my individual self, and like trying to combine like those two elements into like the same person, I think ultimately is what makes your designs better, when you're more authentic with design. And like when it's coming from a place of like something to share versus something to prove. I think that is one of the sentiments that I took away from the show the most, is just like, why are you designing? Who is it for? And like, where is that inspiration and that incentive coming from? And I think like when you start to like ask those types of questions, like your designs innately become better, and in ways that like you don't even realize at the time. So I think like that, those are some of the ways that like I found myself, and I still find myself changing as a designer. One of the other ways is just like it's such like an eye-opening experience to see like the possibilities that are in floristry. One of the things, and I'll kind of like take it back a little bit in time here, that I remember when I started trying to get my induction into AIFD, that like my eyes were so opened to like what else you could do with floral design, right? Like my mom had a flower shop in a small town of like 3,000 people, and like you do your bread and butter of like, you know, your dozen roses, your bud vases, your Easter baskets, that sort of thing, your peace lily plants, you know.
Right.
And so like that's great, like don't get me wrong, like we need those types of shops and those types of designers to be able to do that, because that's so important. But like for me personally, like I wanted to explore this other area of like what else you could do with design. And I think between AIFD, like the Koehler Dram Design Show, like in all these little things and culminating into Full Bloom, like I realized that there's this whole world of floristry where, you know, people don't necessarily have to do weddings and events. They can do corporate installations, they can do product launches, you know, and it's just like looking at what these other designers like had to bring to the table was just such an inspiration for me to challenge even still like what I view as a florist. You know, a lot of these other designers are working with mediums outside of floral design. Some of them work with bespoke jewelry makers. Some of them, you know, work with, you know, product development. And so like looking at all these different things and like taking that all in, like I definitely feel as though like my views on the industry and like what I think that my trajectory could have been is completely changed now.
I really appreciated that about the show. And granted, like we're a little bit more familiar with you than the other designers who were on the show, but I felt personally like your personality and your style really shone through in every piece you created. I think you did a great job like staying true to yourself through the whole show. I thought that was really refreshing to see. Like, you didn't compromise who you were as a designer at any point.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was that was challenging. The first few episodes like were probably like the most intense for me because of that reason. You know, I knew that I was coming in from a different sort of viewpoint, and that the judges necessarily didn't always have that style. So it was sometimes really challenging to like stay true to like what I wanted to share in this competition. Um, but I think ultimately, like when I came back and like I finally saw the episodes like on streaming for the first time, like that was one of the things I was most grateful for that I did, was, you know, stay authentic and stay true to like what I was passionate about for my design style. And so yeah.
How did you feel watching yourself back? Like, was there eye-opening experiences? I'm sure it was kind of hard to see what everyone else was doing when you were doing solo challenges. So like, how was that kind of like a fun new perspective on that journey that you took?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I saw the episodes for the first time, honestly, like I was pleasantly relieved because you are putting out so much of, you know, your thoughts, opinions, and viewpoints like on camera for like dozens of hours of film. And so like you really are putting like your narrative in the trust of, you know, these storyline producers who have your best interest at heart, but ultimately you like are giving them your soul on a little silver platter, and you're like, help me. So yeah, I thought they did a beautiful job of staying authentic and true to each and every one of the designers. You know, having seen like behind the camera and now seeing what it looks like on TV, I really do think that they did a marvelous job of like staying authentic and really showcasing what was actually happening. But yeah, it was super interesting for me to like get to see sort of like the creative process behind each of the other designers and their own design. You know, because like when they did the evaluations for each one of us, you know, we're still sitting at our design stations and like we're hearing the interaction between the judges and the other contestants on their own individual piece. But what you don't always catch is like their creative process. So to be able to watch that like in its entirety was, I think, one of the most interesting parts for me, like now seeing both sides of that.
That's awesome. So I kind of have a question too about the rest of the cast. And I know you mentioned that you felt like you got really close and had a lot in common and kind of bonded with Kristen and Connor. So who was your favorite person to work with as a teammate on the show?
You know, I would say, I think not only because, but in large part because I was able to work with her the most, it would be Kristen. I worked with Connor, I think just on one of the team challenges. And like, I wish I would have gotten to work more with him. So yeah, I would have to say Kristen on that one.
Do you feel like you're getting some lasting friendships and professional connections out of the show? Do you stay in touch with your castmates still?
Absolutely. So we, at first it was kind of like a joke, but then like it's now not becoming a joke that Christina so she's from Napa, and like we are sort of planning this Napa Valley flower excursion weekend getaway where we want to have all of the full bloom cast like out for a fun little shindig of shenanigans. Other people can like come and join us for like a flower hands-on experience. So like that is one of the things that we are like trying to like plan forward for. But you know, we have like our private Instagram messages to each other, and like we have a group chat. So I don't think that like you really can go through something like this and not be like incredibly bonded, especially this year, because you know, like I think even under normal circumstances going into a show like this, you would become really close. But then like with the background of COVID and like having this process, you know, almost doubled in time,
Right.
um, I think that just made us that much closer and that much more in tune with one another, because like we all had to be on the same journey together. Yeah, and then also selfishly, I'm kind of hoping that Connor invites us all to his wedding now.
I asked, did he say yes? I hope he said yes the whole time with like the ending, and I was dying, fangirling a little bit. Yes, I completely aware of that, but it was like, was so good. You know what, the thing that crossed my mind just now is that you guys also had this, not only did you have to deal with COVID, but you also had to deal with the social justice and unrest that was going on. And I really appreciated the way that it was reflected upon in the show. Can you just talk a little bit about that, and how did it cross your guys' mind? I know you're kind of like in your bubble and things were kind of calming down a little bit by that time, but I mean, especially with you here in Minneapolis and everything that kind of transpired this year, how did that go for just the cast and everything?
Yeah, I think that was one of the underlying like elements that were in the challenge that like wasn't necessarily always on film. I think that I know for me to go from filming to shutting down, and not just like shutting down and coming back because of COVID, but like, you know, experiencing what it was like to be in Minneapolis with the killing of George Floyd and like Black Lives Matter. I think those are incredibly important conversations and incredibly important moments for us to like take note of, to make positive change for a more equitable society. But also like having experienced that, I think those were underlying factors like coming back to the competition. Um, it was really interesting and sometimes like discombobulating to go from shooting and like this really high level, like high positive thing, to like coming back and experiencing these really intense social events, and then to go back to filming and then try and pick up exactly where you were. Like the energy and just going, you know, this up and down of it was definitely something that I think a lot of us were feeling. And especially because they did such a beautiful job of casting a wide range of diverse contestants.
Right.
You know, that was incredibly important. And, you know, I can't speak for what other designers were experiencing, but I know for me, like specifically living in like Minneapolis, it was definitely a factor, you know?
No, I really I loved how they highlighted it, and I felt like it was just a great, HBO just did an incredible job of, you know, acknowledging it. And even with Ace and his challenge, his group challenge, and just the connections and the storyline that they were able to create with you guys, I think was just a really beautiful like way for people to kind of heal, and like learning that, you know, you can, flowers doesn't fix everything, but it can definitely help bridge a narrative that we don't necessarily expect. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and again, like that's one of the things like I'm like most proud of from being a part of this experience, is like especially being part of the show, and so grateful that like HBO Max is the one who was like in charge of curating this narrative, because I think they really do like have such integrity in terms of like crafting an experience that like resonates with what's going on now. Yeah, because I you know, I think that's something they really pride themselves on, but like not every network would necessarily have that same initiative. So to be able to do that in the way that they did it, setting on the background of like the common experience that flowers have to like cross sort of like these barriers that people see, is one of like, I think one of the most beautiful moments of this show, is that yes, it's a competition, and yes, it's fun to watch, and yes, it can be a little catty, and that's always great, but also like there's this common bonding element. You know, and just speaking to that, like one of the things that I find was like one of the best moments about the show was at the end of every episode, they donate the flowers that we use to the community that, you know, they're part of. And, you know, I think that is one of the great ways that they were able to show that flowers really give back, and that flowers and our industry in general as a whole is able to like positively impact.
Yeah, I love that part. I love the fact that, you know, it wasn't because there was the amount of product that you guys used was incredible. So I love that that kind of became part of the community then, and that sort of notion of giving back afterwards is, I think, so important and generous and impactful. Um, so I want to ask you too, what you think your biggest lesson or your biggest takeaway is from this experience, and then also there was sort of a lead in at the very end that sort of gave me the impression that there would be other seasons of this show. So what advice would you also give to anyone who competes in the future?
Yeah, so let's see. Okay, so my biggest takeaway first off, and then I'll kind of lead into the other,
Yeah, of course.
that, you know, I think it's really important to be authentic and stay true to not only like who you are as a designer, but like who you are as a person, like what you have to share. Um, you know, I found myself like when I was doing the best in this competition is when I sort of like let go of like the ideas and these misconceptions of like what they were looking for, and just did like what I knew was good, or like what I thought you know, what I was passionate about. And I think that is sort of just like a good representation of us as designers, that when we do our best work is when we're doing our work for ourselves or for the benefit of others, and not for what we think that people expect of us. Um, so kind of like going from that into like how they're casting for season 2, because they are casting for season 2, and
Great.
it's um, which I'm so thrilled about, because I think, yeah, I'm just so excited for them. I've had a couple people actually reach out to me and, you know, ask like what they should do. And I think the same thing again is like, show work that you are proud of, that represents who you are, and don't, you know, and just show work that's authentic. You know, I think a lot of times, like, especially as florists, we get in this cycle of producing work for someone else, because like that is our job and that's what we're there to do. But like, I think when you start looking at design like on this, on not on this level, but in from this like vantage point, I think it's really important that you do a lot of like self work and find out like what you resonate with, and like what do you want to bring to the table. And so I think that, you know, being able to ask yourself those types of questions, that's going to lead to work that, you know, you can produce, that's going to help you be successful, not even like in terms of just getting cast on the show or, you know, any of that, but it's going to make you innately a better designer.
I think there's got to be a lot of freedom in being able to just design and express yourself creatively when you don't have the constraints of someone else's expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think for me, like this experience was like such an incredible exercise in that. You know, because like how often as florists do we get to go in and, you know, look at, I don't know, $80,000 worth of product, and they're like, have fun, see you in 6 hours. Here's a cherry picker. Do you need something else? um, yeah, so like it's just like I feel like it was such like an intense condensed version of like what normally would have happened over a much longer amount of time. So I would say like, you know, even if I didn't get cast on this show, the whole process of like doing the application and going through those processes like already made me a different designer. So like I know that there are a lot of really great designers out there who are really apprehensive about putting their work out there to be judged and to sort of take their designs and put it in someone else's hands. But I think as long as you're like, you know, able to like take that first step, I think that is such a big moment. And like once you can take that first step, like everything else just falls into place.
I think that's all the questions that I have. Adam, do you have anything else that you want to share about your experience?
Um, you know, like I said, I think you know, it's just like one of these crazy things that I'm so grateful to have been part of. And yeah, just to be able to like share like what I can, or, you know, share some of my experiences on this show. Like that honestly has been like um, some of the most rewarding moments that I've had a part of this whole experience. So yeah, I'm just really grateful that people get to sort of get a peek into like my narrative and then also the other 9 contestants, because I think that between like all 10 of the designers, there really is something for everyone to sort of like find and resonate with. And I think, you know, apart from, you know, it being like an incredibly like sensory experience of floral design and really getting to see like this arc of like just the most incredible designs and working with such beautiful product, it really at its core is something that, you know, people can relate to. And I think, you know, especially right now with where we're at in the world, I think it's really great to have something that's not just like feel good television, but it's really something that, you know, can help, you know, you relate and sort of like reach out and have something tangible to grasp hold of. Yeah, and I just think that's really important right now.
Well, and I think also, you know, what you said about telling your own narrative, I think that's going to inspire so many younger generations to really take that step towards, you know, maybe I've never thought of, you know, being in the floral industry, but like, look at the cool things you can do with it. So I really enjoyed how positive a spin and the narratives that you all each individually brought to this show, because I think that it's really important for our younger generations who are starting to wonder, like, what do I do with myself? I'm, you know, I don't fit in the corporate world, and I don't want to go to college, or, you know, I think this is just a beautiful light that can be shined on for people too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think this is like a really big first step. Um, in terms of like interjecting like some fresh life into the world of floristry. You know, I think it's really great like where we've gotten to this point, but I really think like we were kind of at a point where we needed some fresh energy put into it. And you know, I think HBO has done a really good job of doing that. So I think it's going to inspire, like you said, a whole new generation of florists into our little world, and which is really great and really exciting.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for spending some time with us to talk about your experience with Full Bloom. I know Emily and I certainly enjoyed the conversation that we all had today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, as always, guys, I want to ask you if you want to subscribe to Adam on his Instagram. We'll for sure link it in the links below. And then don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Koehler Design. So we are so excited. More fun things to come. As always, thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Right.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you.